4.5 acres, and since then we've gradually built up little bits and pieces. It's 9 acres, but 7 is the garden. The house itself is an old house built by Sir John Howell in round about 1600, and the name is also quite interesting because this place was called Compt in the year 1240. And since Sir John Howell, a lot of people have owned this, including the Lambard family from Sevenoaks, and they were here for 200 years, but they never lived here. They had it as an investment, and around about 1840, one of the Lambard daughters married an Admiral Randolph, and they came to live here. And it was at that time that a lot of refurbishment took place. They built the porch there. They planted that avenue of trees. It used to be an avenue until 1987, and half of them blew down. And they also did the walled garden on the other side. You'll see a walled garden. So that's really the basis of this garden. 1840, that was the sort of middle of it. And then the other one is Mrs. Maxwell. Now, Mrs. Heron Maxwell was a most remarkable woman who came here with her husband to farm from Wigtonshire in 1903. And in 1956 she decided to go for a holiday in Switzerland and was up in the Alps in a chairlift looking for gentians, and she died at the age of 90. Still looking for gentians. She was a most remarkable woman. You'll have heard of the Ashes. You'd be a bit pushed if you didn't. The lady who burnt the bales came here to talk about the Ashes and other things in the 1920s, because English women's cricket started here. The first meetings that set up the English Women's Cricket Association, and this lady was she married the English captain, you see, an Australian, and they lived at Cobham Hall along here, the Countess of Darnley. Anyway, that's oh yes, and needless to say, Mrs. Maxwell was the first president. She was also the president of the English Hockey Association. She was the first chairman of the West Kent Federation of Women's Institutes, etc., etc. And that was Mrs. Maxwell, and it was her garden that we inherited. Her executors sold the property to a Mr. Moulton Barrett, Barretts of Wimpole Street. Edward Moulton Barrett was one of the last of the Barretts of Wimpole, direct descendant of Mr. Barrett of Wimpole Street. And he didn't want the house. He wanted the Oast houses next door there, and he couldn't sell this. So we were, in my opinion, extremely lucky. They couldn't sell it, so it was going for a reasonable price, and we got it in 1957. And since then, we have gradually, my late wife and I did it all ourselves for about 20 years, and we gradually, because we've now got the Randolph's garden and a bit more of the Maxwell's garden, you see, and but we gradually altered it, and neither of them, apart from the square on the other side, I don't think either of them would recognise it now, you see. Although it was a good garden in Mrs. Maxwell's time, that's obvious, isn't it? She wasn't going to be doing all that and not have a good garden. We wanted more plants, trees, shrubs and perennials and all sorts of plants. So what you see now is really our garden, and it's gradually extended at it until we gradually got more ground. This was a field with horses in it in 1957, and it still was a field with horses in 1970. When I retired, I was able to sort of freeze my pension and retire in 1971, and we went up there. So all that there dates from 1971. And the bottom 2 acres, which was a field of lettuces. In 1961, we managed to get a couple of acres from the farmer that Mr. Moulton Barrett sold it to, you see. So that's how we got here. I don't want to boast, but people say, oh, well, that must have been here. There are only 12 trees in this garden that we didn't plant. apart from obviously these in the front. Because Mrs. Maxwell wasn't particularly a tree person, you see. So that's just about all. Oh yes, the two other things. The ruins at Great Compt, apart from the one that's talking to you. You know, I said this ruin dates from 1918 to an American party. A chap came, he was very disturbed at this, an American. He couldn't understand it. He thought I had been wounded in 1918. I didn't think I'd be as old as that. Anyway, that's joking apart. So it's a dangerous thing to make jokes. But the ruins date from 1972 or something like that. Built mainly by myself from 1972 or 3 to listen to this. To 2005. In other words, in the middle of the garden you'll see what we call the tower. It's only a small tower. We did a lot of work to it last winter, altering the big stones and things like that. And I assure you, we've never bought a stone. Every stone you see in this garden was found here, dug up or lying around, or there's seams of stone under the ground. So that's the ruins, gradually built over the years since then. And the people who work here, there's Robert here, who's full-time, and there are 2 part-time people, and that's all we've got here, you see. William Dyson is the curator, looks after the whole property, keeps an eye on Robert, you know, and things like that. But he also runs his own nursery. You see, he's got the 2 hats. He's a part-time curator, you see, and gets paid for something. So I think that's all I've got to say to you. I'll be about there if there's any question. There is a book here. This is, although it's called Great Compt Garden, it's really about my life and all the, right back to 1400, 1200, about the house as well, you see. So, but if you're interested in it, it is for sale, but there's also a copy in the tea room which you can have a look at. Well, I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.